Question 2, because we're skipping question 1, says label the radius, center, diameter, and circumference on the circle. Now the first thing I'm going to talk about right here is going to be actually the center, because we need the center for like almost everything else. Now the center should be fairly obvious. It would be the center of your circle. Now center is another word for middle. So this is the middle of our circle. So put a dot right there. We'll label this with center. Now the next thing that I want to talk about is going to be our radius. Now remember, when it comes to our circle, our radius goes halfway across or all the way across. Our radius goes halfway across. So we're going to go from the center to the edge, and that right there is going to be our radius. Next thing we'll talk about is going to be our diameter. Now a diameter goes halfway across or all the way across. A diameter goes all the way across and it passes through the center of our circle. So this right here is our diameter. Okay. And the last thing is circumference. Now how would you define circumference? Circumference is our distance around the circle. So this right here is our circumference. All right, this one right here asks, what is pi? Now, there are a few ways that we defined pi today. The first thing that I want to talk about is the actual definition of pi. And here's what we know. We know that pi is a what? What goes in this blank right here? Ratio. What goes in this blank right here? It's a ratio of what to what? Circumference and then what goes in this last blank right here? Diameter. So pi is a ratio of circumference to diameter. Now, because it's a ratio, that means we can write it as a fraction. Now, if it's a ratio of circumference to diameter, which word goes on top? Circumference. What word goes on the bottom? Diameter. And the last thing that we know is we know the approximate value of pi. So what is the numerical number of pi? 3.14. All right, this says if the diameter of a circle is 7.5 centimeters, what is the radius? So it is asking us to go from diameter to radius. How do we go from diameter to radius? We divide by 2. So my diameter is 7.5. To go from diameter to radius, I divide by 2. So I would do 7.5 divided by 2. And when I do that, that gives me 3.75. That's probably not correct. Hold on. That was correct. Okay, so 3.75 is our radius. All right, the next one says, if the radius of a circle is 3.85, what is the diameter? So this time it's asking us to go from radius to diameter. So how do I go from radius to diameter? In this case, I would multiply by 2. So I would take my radius, which is 3.85, and I would multiply it times 2 to get to my diameter. That's going to give me 7.7. The next one says the circumference of a circle is c inches. The diameter is 17 inches. Write an expression that best represents the value of pi. Now this right here is a super complicated way to ask you again for the definition of pi. Now, if we go back over here to question number 2, we see that pi is a ratio of circumference to diameter, which means that pi equals circumference over diameter. So I know pi equals circumference over diameter. Now, all I have to do is I just first have to look and see what my circumference is. So let's read it. It says the circumference of a circle is c inches. Well, that didn't tell me anything except that the circumference literally is c. So this right here is going to stay a c. And then it said, the other thing I need to know is about my diameter. So let's keep reading. The diameter is 17 inches. So where my diameter is, I would put 17. So it's c over 17. The next one says the circumference of a circle is c centimeters. The radius is 6 centimeters. Use this information to write an expression that best represents the value of pi. So in this case, it's once again using that funky vocabulary to remind me of what the definition of pi is. And I know that pi is a ratio of what to what? I know that pi is a ratio of circumference to diameter. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look for my circumference. So I'm going to read. It says the circumference of a circle is c centimeters. So what am I going to put in for circumference? For circumference, I'm going to put c. Then I'm going to look for where it says diameter. The next thing it says the radius is 6 centimeters, and then it doesn't tell me anything about the diameter. But I do know something about the relationship between a radius and a diameter. And how do I get from a radius to a diameter? To get from a radius to a diameter, I multiply by 2. So if my radius is 6, what would my diameter be? If my radius is 6, my diameter equals 12 because I do 6 times 2. I take my radius and I multiply it times 2. So my diameter is going to be 12. The next one says the circumference of a circle is about 128.55 yards. The diameter is 40.92 yards. Write an expression that best represents the value of pi. Now in this situation, I know that if I see this funky sentence, it's reminding me of the definition of pi. And I know that pi equals, I know that pi is a ratio of what to what? Pi is a ratio of circumference to diameter. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look for my circumference. And what does it say my circumference is? It says my circumference is 128.55 yards. So up on the top, I'm going to put 128.55. The next thing it says is I'm going to look for my diameter. What does it say your diameter is? It says that my diameter is 40.92 yards. So on the bottom, I'll put 40.92. And that's it. The last question says, Mike filled up his recreational vehicle before a vacation. The gas tank holds 52 gallons. There are approximately 3.8 liters in 1 gallon. How many liters can Mike's gas tank hold? Now, I am aware that this has nothing to do with circles. However, you have taken 7th grade math before, and this is a 7th grade math skill. So I want you to take a think back to like literally 2 weeks ago when you were in school and think about what you would do in this situation. So right here, I see gallons, and I see gallons, and I see liters, and I see liters. That means that I see the same unit twice. If I see the same unit twice, that means I set up a proportion. Now, because there are no percents, that means I set up 1, 2, 3 lines. This first line right here is going to be my units. So we just talked about our units. Units are how our numbers are measured, and we have gallons and we have liters. Now, I look and I just break down my sentences. So sentence 1 says the gas tank holds 52 gallons. Okay. Cool. Gas tank holds 52 gallons. Then the next thing I see is it says there are approximately 3.8 liters in 1 gallon. That means that 3.8 equals 1. So those two things need to go in the same proportion. The other way you can think about it is that this right here is sentence number 1. Sentence number 1 goes in my first ratio. This right here is sentence number 2. Sentence number 2 goes in my second ratio. There are approximately 3.8 liters in 1 gallon. That means that 3.8 goes with my liters, which is down here on the bottom. Then, in 1 gallon, 3.8 and 1 are in the same sentence, so they're going to go in the same ratio or the same fraction. So 1 needs to go right here. That means that oddly enough, my x is right there. How do you solve a proportion? You cross multiply. So I do x times 1. Well, x times 1 just gives me 1x, which is the same thing as just x. Then after that, I'll do 52 times 3.8. That was disgusting. I'm so sorry. 52 times 3.8. And that gives me 197.6. So that's 197.6 liters.